This episode we journey to Lincolnshire, England, to a place where bricks were laid with power and purpose, where prestige once reigned and perhaps may still linger. This is the story of Thorpe Hall. Rising from the quiet village of Thorpe on the Hill, just south of Lincoln, Thorpe Hall is no ordinary country manor. With its stately presence and storied past, this Jacobean mansion has weathered centuries of change, war, and decay, each leaving a distinct mark on its soul. Its story begins in the mid-17th century. The year was 1653. England was in great turmoil. The monarchy had fallen, Oliver Cromwell held the country in his iron grip, and the English Civil War had left both towns and families divided. It was during this fractious period that Colonel Sir John Bowell, a figure of wealth, influence and parliamentary loyalty, commissioned the construction of the hall. Built upon the remains of an older medieval structure, Thorpe Hall rose as a symbol of power and stability amidst the chaos of the Commonwealth. Constructed in red brick with classical proportions, the hall was not just a home, it was a declaration. A fortified estate with a square layout, towering chimneys and meticulously designed gardens. Its rooms echoed with the sound of political discourse, religious fervour, and the hushed intrigues of aristocratic life. But even from the start there were whispers. Locals spoke of strange figures glimpsed at twilight along the long tree-lined drive, of cold spots in newly built rooms, and of a shadowed upper floor that servants hesitated to enter after dark. Not long after the hall was completed, stories circulated of a young kitchen maid who fled her position abruptly. According to a steward's ledger entry from around the 1670s, she'd been working a late shift in the kitchens when she reportedly saw a figure walk past the scullery door, dressed in black, featureless and entirely silent. She assumed it was one of the master's family or visiting clergy, but when she followed the figure into the corridor, there was no one there. The doors were all bolted from the inside. The next morning she was found crying in the courtyard. She refused to re-enter the house and claimed the figure had no feet beneath its robes and glided like it was dragged on chains. The account was dismissed at the time as hysteria, but it would not be the last of its kind. Thorpe Hall's upper gallery, an enclosed walkway overlooking the main entrance hall, was one of the grandest features of the property, but by the early 18th century, a recurring complaint had emerged from visiting guests and domestic staff: the sound of footsteps pacing the gallery at night, particularly during the winter months. The pacing was said to be rhythmic, measured, and distinctly booted, like a soldier's march. And yet no one was ever seen. Several letters from 1712 to 1725 by tenants and family guests mention being kept awake by the noise. In one, a guest wrote, "There was walking overhead the whole of the night like unto a guardsman at drill, but upon lighting a taper and ascending to inspect, I found no living soul in the upper rooms, only cold air and a door ajar which I had earlier latched." This specific phenomenon became so commonly accepted that servants refused to stay in the gallery rooms alone, especially in December and January. A visiting vicar, believed to be from the parish of nearby Bassingham, recorded a strange event in his journal around 1704. He'd been invited to stay at Thorpe Hall during a period of family mourning. One evening, while writing in a guest room located on the hall's eastern wing, he noted, "3 times the flame of my candle expired, and thrice I rekindled it. Yet I felt no draught, nor was there any air stirring. The wick was untouched and good. It was as though something unseen exhaled upon it." When he mentioned this the next day, a housemaid told him bluntly, "That room does not want light at night." She later refused to enter it after dusk. One of the hall's more curious early features was a guest room outfitted with a large wall mirror imported from Venice, an expensive luxury at the time. From as early as 1730, it was rumoured that reflections in the mirror sometimes showed things not present in the room. A visiting magistrate's wife allegedly fainted after seeing what she described as a figure in mourning lace with hollow eyes, weeping in the glass, though none stood behind her. The mirror was said to have been removed in 1751 under quiet instruction from the owner, following several unsettling incidents. Local accounts say it was taken to a barn and smashed, though some believe the mirror simply vanished. In the mid-18th century, a gentleman from London, believed to be a relative of the hall's then owner, stayed in what is now referred to as the North Room. On the second night of his stay, he was awakened by what he described as a violent trembling of the mattress beneath me, as if shaken by unseen hands. The phenomenon lasted about 10 seconds, accompanied by a low rumbling noise, but when he leapt up to inspect the room, nothing was out of place. A note he wrote to his sister reads, "I swear to you, it was as though the very foundation of the bed was disturbed, not from beneath but within. I had thought it an earthquake, but the house stood still." This bed-shaking event would later be reported by 2 more guests in the same room, once in 1792 and again in 1808, though the accounts were kept discreet to avoid alarming the ladies. Multiple housekeepers and night staff from the late 18th century passed down tales of a child's cry heard in the early hours, usually between 2 and 4 a.m., originating from the rear servants' hallway or near the main staircase. Descriptions were eerily consistent. The crying was soft, high-pitched, and lasted no more than a few minutes. It was usually followed by a heavy silence, which staff described as dead air, unnaturally quiet. One chambermaid, who stayed past her contract, claimed she once saw a small boy in 18th century attire sitting on the main stairs, his face obscured by shadow. No known deaths of a child were recorded in that area, but speculation arose that a servant's child may have died in the house during an outbreak of illness. However, no burial records confirm this. Thorpe Hall once had an orchard and small garden walk beyond the main house. A visitor in 1802 noted seeing a figure in what she believed to be monastic robes standing still beneath one of the old fruit trees at dusk. When she asked the groundskeeper about it the next morning, he admitted others had seen it too, describing a tall, hooded shape in brown or grey, motionless, as if waiting. The apparition became known as the Monk of Thorpe, though no monastery was ever officially located on the estate. Some speculate there may have been a pre-Reformation chapel or hermitage on or near the site before the hall was constructed. Beginning in the 1820s, people living near the estate began to report a chilling phenomenon, the sound of horse hooves and a carriage approaching the hall, always between midnight and 1 a.m., usually in autumn and winter. However, no coach ever appeared. Witnesses described the sound of gravel crunching under wheels, occasional flickers of lantern light moving along the old carriage path, a cold breeze or unnatural stillness in the aftermath. In 1837, a guest reported hearing the same thing from an upper window, convinced visitors were arriving. He waited by the entrance for nearly 20 minutes before being told by staff, "That road's been quiet these 50 years. If you heard wheels, it was not of this earth." The legend eventually evolved into the tale of the phantom coach of Thorpe Hall, sometimes said to arrive as a death omen, heard only before a significant tragedy within the household. In 1851, a governess named Mary Felton, staying at Thorpe Hall, wrote of a strange event in her journal. She had been teaching a young child in one of the sitting rooms when the air turned bitterly cold, like ice water pouring through the walls. Despite the roaring fire, the temperature dropped so sharply that both she and the child could see their breath. She describes how the child went rigid and whispered, "He's watching again." When asked who, the child would not speak, and later drew a figure with hollow eyes standing at the window. The room returned to normal after 10 minutes. The incident disturbed the governess so much that she requested to be moved to another part of the house and left the hall a few weeks later. There is a door in the cellar corridor that was reportedly nailed shut sometime in the mid-1800s, its original purpose unclear. However, reports from both staff and workers during the 1880s describe how this very door would occasionally swing open, despite being physically locked or boarded. The butler recorded in 1884, "3 times now the black door has been found ajar, though I myself sealed it with iron clasp and key. Mr. Garrett the carpenter affirms no one has gone down there, nor could they without light. Something about that passage puts me on edge." The corridor is said to be one of the most active parts of the hall today, and modern investigators often report EMF spikes, battery drain and temperature drops in that specific area. Thorpe Hall is more than an old building tucked away in the Lincolnshire countryside. It's a vessel of memory, of echoes layered thick over centuries. Each wall, each beam seems to have absorbed not just the voices of the living, but something else. Something that waits, watches, replays its story even when no one's listening. What's perhaps most unsettling is how quiet the hall's reputation has remained. These stories weren't shouted from rooftops or splashed across newspapers. They were whispered, handed down from staff to servant, from guest to journal, passed like a cold breath from one generation to the next. There are no screaming phantoms here, no gothic theatrics, only the tread of boots in the gallery at midnight, a candle that won't stay lit, a child's sob echoing from an empty room, and a coach that no longer rolls up the gravel drive, but is still heard all the same. Some places demand attention. Thorpe Hall does the opposite. It waits patiently, hidden in plain sight, allowing its truths to bleed through slowly, over time.